Hello again, everyone. Now we're going to receive an exhibition presentation facilitated by Ritumetsi Malefane, and their topic is on exploring aquaponic hydroponic systems for food security in township schools. So, Tumi, if you and your team would take it away.
Mulweni, right? Trust you well. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to at least share our engagement this year. So the title of the project is Aquaponic, Hydroponic, the exploration of a community garden in Govendale Hope Fontaine School. And I just want to give you context, which is very important. I did not really prepare anything other than the presentation, but just to ground the idea behind exactly where this is coming from. And it all began last year. It originated last year with the first initial Critical Sustainability Literacies, where we looked, with my students last year, we looked at this project aimed at revitalizing dilapidated industrial hubs across the rural Eastern Cape. And from there, we had a great opportunity where we coordinated with Professor Viona Goliath, who brought me and my students to this potential project engagement in Fontaine Home School. And that was where it originated. So I'm part of a committee, the Hope School Committee, which we look to create safe spaces for this particular school. And for me, on site, I did come across some very interesting potential that I think could actually really reimagine the whole community as a whole. And that's where I actually started to bring my students this year. So the beauty of this site, there is a vein of water. We don't know where it's coming from. And for me, I saw that as a potential project starter, a catalyst in how we can start to see how we can create a circular system that uses this aquaponic and community in actually producing a self-sustaining model for the community itself. So that's where it actually started. And before we actually get to the site, this was actually a very fantastic engagement because I have to take you through it. So Dr. Bruce Demons, where's Oyama? Oyama? Where's Oyama? Okay. So, and again, okay, no, Dr. Bruce, I can plug me and my students. We were on our way to Fontaine Home School, but he asked us to really stop at Helen Vale. If you know Helen Vale, it's Katanga. And for me, you could feel the tension between, it's literally 400 meters apart. But you could feel the tension, and I'm sure my peers, students, no, they're my peers at this point, will let you know that it was surreal, really, that visceral feeling of just the two sides. And yeah, so that's just the whole backstory. But before, no, I think I'm done with that because I want my students to actually take this over and really explain to you exactly what was the thought behind exactly their own project proposal. So over here we have 4 project proposals that actually look to imagine exactly how does a future for a self-sustaining community garden can look like in township schools. And we really did find this important part from the principal that, and I asked him, what's the most pressing issue that you are facing here? Food security. Children go to school hungry, and more often than not, it's the last meal they have. So this is a real important project that I feel could be a good model that could serve as a to serve other townships. But without further ado, let me introduce you to our class rep.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I'm Lesego Mangole. First and foremost, I'd like to appreciate the the space, really. I appreciate the organizers, I appreciate the delegates here, and I appreciate my lecturer for bridging us into such an engagement. For me, the biggest reflection, really, the biggest takeaway from this project, and understanding the project and understanding the agenda here at hand, which is critical sustainability, is how we, I think, as a profession, we as professionals, I think we as a nation are shifting actually to close the gap. And I remember I was trying to conscientize this with my group members when we were working on a solution for this project, on how we're trying to close the gap between the people's issues and our issues, the issues we have right now with national government, you know. And I think this project and its brief is quite a great example of that, because when it starts off, when we got the brief, it starts off with the biggest socio-economic issues we have right now in South Africa, which is the likes of hunger, which is the likes of unemployment and entrepreneurship, right? So I think from getting that brief, it started to unlock a new way of thinking, that not only do you want to resolve what's on the site, you really want to start addressing some of these bigger issues, these national issues, you know. So unlocking a new way of thinking, we started speaking about researching on aquaponics and hydroponics. I think it's an overwhelming term, but it is a simple system where you try and now replace the sand, the soil and its nutrients to grow these plants, and then you start replacing them with water, right? And that's water fueled with nutrients and vitamins, right? And then you 10x that particular idea, and then you start bringing in fish, and then that's aquaponics, right? And I think the biggest reflection for me is how, as soon as you understood that particular system, you started closing some of these moving issues that we have around the site, you know, to the likes of entrepreneurship and unemployment. Those are things that automatically, when we started understanding that system, we started resolving it. Now that we have the system on site, and we want to believe that it will be installed and it will work properly, and we'll have these meals catered to these kids on site, right? And at a later stage, a conversation will be had on how the people on site can easily take the ideology, you know, most probably from our university, on how they can implement that for themselves in those homes, right? And we want to see that, obviously, those systems, as soon as they get implemented more often, they discussed, we're going to start seeing some entrepreneurship coming in. And automatically, I think, when we speak entrepreneurship, we start understanding that the unemployment situation gets resolved automatically, you know. So with the untapped vein that my lecturer mentioned, we started now understanding that, of course, we could start selling the water that's purified water through filtration systems, you know, as a way of entrepreneurship, you know. And for me, the takeaway there was that if we understand it properly, if we do it properly and it's implemented properly on site, it will unlock a commodity that's often left unsaid. I think it's only said in the sauna once in a year, but I think this particular system will unlock one thing called hope, you know, the idea that when you wake up tomorrow, you hope for a better day, you know. So yeah, I think that's it for me. I think I'll cross over to my colleagues.
Good day, everyone. My name is Matapelo. First of all, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'd like to greet all of you, all protocols observed. We're grateful for this opportunity because this speaks to the event of the day, decolonizing architecture. So when we receive, I just want to also acknowledge my group members because of all the work we put in. I was a lot of all-nighters, by the way. So one of them is here, Melissa. So yes, as I was saying, so when we started off the project at hand, we looked at how decolonizing architecture would speak to giving back to communities. We really looked and tapped into how our way of architecture really speaks to giving back to communities and impacting communities. So we approached it in a sense of saying to ourselves, how do we become a solution to the untapped vein, as our lecturers mentioned? How do we tap into that and we give back to the community? Not only do we give back to them, but we create systems where they would be able to create a source of income for themselves using the water. And also this is a school, it's a primary school. Also, how do we then teach the children how to secure food? How do we not only teach them to secure food in a sense of teaching and learning, but also in a sense of, as we are teaching them and as they are being taught and as they are learning, they get into a space of understanding that they can tap into selling whatever it is that they are planting. As my colleague has mentioned, that we tapped into aquaponics and hydroponics. So the plan with our design was the first thing was when we looked at the problem, like I said, untapped water, we said, let's find a way to, because now, I'm not sure if you've explained how the site is. So what's happening is on site, the water is on the lower side of the site, and we need to take it uphill. It needs to be taken into the uphill side of the site. That's where we'll plant everything. That's where we'll run our hydroponics. So now we have to pump the water from the lower side of the site, and then pump it into the site that we're going to have our hydroponics and aquaponics. So the first thing that we're doing is we pumping in the water. And after pumping in the water, we're running hydroponics and aquaponics. And right after that, what we'll do is we will now give back to the community. We'll have lettuce, we'll have spinach. So what we'll do is we'll have people in the community come in and work. And as they work, and especially unemployed people, because the challenges that we're facing is unemployment, it's poverty, and also it's gangsterism. So how we resolve that then now is that the people who are working there, what we do is we would then now give them a meal a day. For example, we would give them spinach, we'd give them lettuce, we'd give back to the community in a sense that now we are trying to get the community to be in a position where they recognize that this is really giving back to them, and that if there's ideas of trying to, I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Thank you. So as I was saying, so we're unlocking those ideas, and we are unlocking those, we're looking really at giving back to the community because it's a marginalized community. And so we're looking at going back to entrepreneurship. So we have designed this in such a way that the children will be in a position where they'll be in an indoor-outdoor classroom. So what they'll do is, while they're playing outside, they'll be learning about hydroponics and aquaponics, and they do this from a very young age. So you can imagine as they grow older, they know how to plant, they know how to plant all these veggies, and as they're growing and they give back to their communities, they're also learning, and that also now opens up a way for education in higher learning. So we're paving a way for them, and we're starting while they're still young. So those are the ideas around entrepreneurship. And then the ideas around the untapped water would be to use a zero liquid discharge system, and then we would have to then now purify the water and sell it to communities because we know PE struggles with the water, right? So we then sell tailored to people around PE or communities, marginalized communities that struggle with water around PE. So yeah, that's just about it from me. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ritumetse Lekganyane, and we designed one of the aquaponic systems, or yes, let's keep it at systems. With our design, I think the approach we tried to use was, I think, using 4 different types of categories. The first being teaching and learning for the students, as my group our colleagues have mentioned already. Second being an interactive space for the learners, because based on site observation, the learners actually play in the water where it's flooded. There are frogs, they play with the frogs, they slide on the railings and whatnot. And we also tried to create a system that had a mass production that would serve the community as well as the school, because the school does have a kitchen that caters for the students, as well as lastly, a shop that will give back to the community as well as the school itself. So I think what we tried to do with the learning space was that, like it was mentioned, creating an indoor-outdoor experience. And I think the best way to do that is not only through observation, but also through the act of doing. Because I think for most students, or learners rather, they learn through actually partaking in certain activities, so being planting or whatever the case might be. And I think what we also tried to do was creating an interactive space that will not only be for learning, but also be an enjoyable space, a fun space for the learners, so that they also want to be in the space, or they feel like, this space was created for me. Because I think in most cases, a lot of things are not designed for the little people or primary. It's either for younger or adults. So I think trying to bridge that gap between the two by involving them in such a way that they will also go back home and say, Mom, Dad, I learned how to do this. This is how we plant, this is how we grow crops, or whatever the case might be. And I think with that, it also encourages the parents to also partake in the different types of vegetations, or the hydroponic and aquaponic interaction, as well as just also giving back to the school, but in a way that it will also benefit them as the community. I think we also try to incorporate different ways of generating electricity or energy outside of your regular solar panels and whatnot. I think what we tried to do was incorporate things like a pave gen, which is a walkway that generates electricity just by you walking on it, and things like a kinetic tree, so that all the interactions from your walkway, we had a kinetic playground, whereby even if the kids are still playing, we're still generating electricity. So it serves 2 purposes, basically killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So I think the other thing was trying to make sure that, like, kids are kids, so generally they do break things or ruin things, which is why we tried to create the 2 different spaces, like I mentioned, an interactive one and a mass production. The interactive one was the one where they take part in the actual planting and then taking care of the crops, and then the mass one being for the parents, the teachers, and the community at large. So that's the kind of approach we tried to use. And also the shop for the community and the school itself, it was so that the school can also, the community can also get a benefit out of interacting with the school itself, so that they don't feel like, okay, it's give to the school, but we're also getting in return. So it will also allow them to also want to make a difference in their children's lives, but also in theirs, in such a way that they know that if they were to possibly provide that idea to a different type of community, it's something that will also benefit them, and it's not just beneficial to that specific community. So yeah, I think that's what we tried to mostly highlight for that community, for the school and the community at large?
Hello everyone, my name is Obaje Marwani and I was in the same group with Ritumete. And our focus, considering that most of the students, before we dived into the proper site inspection, we were introduced to that most of the students were struggling with food back home. So like there would be certain teachers who would take time off or actually work long hours just to provide for kids within the afternoon. So we thought about how about we actually introduce a system where the kids are able to make their own food and actually eat at school and take some home. Also introducing also the shop which Tumi mentioned about placing it quite a bit further away from the school structure and focusing it a bit more on creating privacy, considering the place in which the school was located is quite unsafe for the students also and the teachers, considering the high rate of crime which is within the area. But basically, Timi stole all of the words basically about our projects. But then I will just go in depth on how the aquaponics and hydroponic system works. So usually for our projects, our approach was firstly water storage, where we actually store the water to actually create a free flow structure where we don't actually require water from the municipality, but then from the nature reserve, from the water supply, which doesn't actually need any, even though the water supply was disrupted, wouldn't actually need it to fully function the plantation. Then the next one being the filtration system. Considering hydroponics and aquaponics, it's a huge ideal thing to work with the pH balance, the temperature, the nutrients in which the plants are going to need. So we used a filtration system to make sure that all of those needs are met, allowing for mass production and full first grade, hopefully, first grade plantation system. Then for the water distribution, we had two options, which was bamboo and UPVC. So with bamboo, it was going to be quite a tough one, considering the supply and management and keeping the infrastructure in place. So we decided using UPVC, considering it also doesn't contaminate the water when it's been supplied. Then for hydroponic systems, we actually use the hydroponic aeroponic system, which distributes the water through small thin lines into the system, maximizing the full capacity of the water which is needed for the plants. Then there's another from the system, it goes to the, oh, excuse, I'm sorry, my bad, I'm a bit nervous also. So yeah, but then for the plantations, we place them in vertical walls, vertical systems, maximizing the amount of plants we can plant within the system. Considering in normal ways, we usually plant them horizontally. We decided to go up instead of like placing them on the floor. So that maximizes the capacity in which we could produce. Then from the systems, it would usually go back to the aquaponic, which was fish and water. And usually with that fish and water system, there would usually be feces which develops from that system. Using that feces, we used that feces and took it back into the system, making fertilizers so that the plants can work efficiently. Then once that whole system is actually took place, we took it back to the storage tank, allowing for actually an enclosed circulation of the water. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so I just want to just talk about the architecture in itself as a subject, as a module as well, and how we are, how this is a decolonial approach within architecture. So yes, within architecture we do think about construction. I'm sure many of you remember a few years back on the Africanisation Decolonisation in Daba, there was a exploration of indigenous knowledge systems as the one anchoring aspect, but I think as well with architecture, we need to think about context. Now, we as a building, I like to say we're an island. I'm not sure if any of you guys know where the architecture building is. Anyone? Raise your hands. An island. An island. An island that is divorced from the, I like to say what is anchoring us as an institution. And if you look at the grand position, we are to position ourselves in community, in service of society. And as a student myself, I must say that all the projects I did was mainly in the summer strand, warmer, so context does matter. And now, coming into sustainability, we are trying to move away from these green metrics as how we evaluate what is sustainable. These, my peers will tell you, your R value, your U value. But what about social justice? What about people on the margins of society who, I had a nice word, yeah? Where's this word? Who are unevenly sustained itself. So I think in itself, we start to really think about the dynamics at play here. Systems in place of people, ecology, natural ecology that is coming from the site, the water, and of course for me, how can it be self-sustaining? Whereby we can start to now look at a circular model where now a community itself can start to stand alone, independent from any government. And I think that is where I think the driver here was for the project, where to allow students here to think really deeply around these constraints on the site. So I think it's our step towards actually decolonization, I think. And of course, context. What is the architectural expression? What is the cultural identity of this community? How is that expressed as a unique form of architecture itself? That is something that is grounded, rooted in context. Of course, and as well, acknowledges survival practices and how does that actually come across as architecture. So that, for me, is how I think we are moving towards a broader decolonial approach within architecture, where sustainability is measured more than these metrics, but really the impact it can have in society. That was powerful, wow. So I'll give it back to Jenny. Colleagues, anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to add that also with the shop that Tumi has mentioned, we're also thinking about fish fingers, right? I'm adding them, and also I'm adding how we didn't only want to focus on leafy plants, but we also wanted to focus on fish. You know, we also wanted to not only, you know how when people think they come and help you, and they think they come and help you and they give you the bare minimum. So we are saying that we're not only focusing on giving the bare minimum, but we're also really going into depth with aquaponics in terms of also providing protein. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to pretty much just segue, I think, into the next conversation, because I think these all speak to these. This conversation speaks to the next conversation that we're going to have, which is on sustainable pedagogies and praxes, responding to the imperatives of Africanization and decolonization in AG. So we've had a presentation here of pretty much this in practice, I think, or in Praxes. So this next space is really intended for us to have a chance to share from everyone who's here today, both in terms of thinking, conceptualizing, but also actual practical things that you are doing in your classroom, in your community, in your backyard, whatever, so that we can think together a little bit more about these problems that we're facing, about the ideas of sustainability, how we conceptualize, and how we push back against dominant ideologies. And then also, hopefully, you might hear someone speaking about work that they're doing that speaks to your work, and maybe you can chat later at lunch. And that is how we grow these kinds of work, through connections, through relationality. So that's kind of the idea of the space. You'll see we're set up in kind of a, I don't know how, must I hold it here or over here? Does anyone know? Doesn't matter, okay. So this is really this kind of space. But I have asked some people I know who do work in this area to kind of start the conversation for us. If you're happy sitting where you're sitting, that's fine. So we'll start with Babalwa, and then we'll speak to Mikalinos, Shirley, and come back to Tumi at some point as well. And then hopefully the conversation can just build from there. Babalwa, do you have a mic? Because I was gonna, yes, okay. So I wanted to start with you because you're very much involved with the sustainable consciousness and social consciousness and sustainable futures module, right, at the university. And I think it really speaks to ideas we're trying to explore here. It comes out of the Fees Must Fall moment, which was calling for decoloniality, especially in higher education and pedagogy and curriculum. So yeah, I'd really like to hear you speak through a bit of that, the thinking around it, and sort of like these underlying ideas that like form part of the module. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Please excuse my kind of, I'm feeling a little bit hazy. I don't know, it's the season. And thank you so much for your presentation, and obviously the presentation by Hugo and Andre, which when I read what the Mandela students were imagining in 2016 already is exactly what you guys are doing now. So I'm super proud. And when you were talking, Retumetsi, Lebohang, and I think you said Obaking, you reminded me of this movie that is called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Please go and look at it. It's based on a Malawian village where a young boy seeks to provide water for the rural community, and it changes the whole community in how he uses physics to feed the community. So just great work that you're doing. Thank you. So it's basically the work that the social consciousness and sustainable futures is centered around. When Fees Must Fall was happening, I always say this is one of the beautiful legacies of that moment at Mandela. And this year it has been rolled out in 3 faculties. We've got more than 1,265 students currently registered for the module. And one of the people presenting is Pumla here. So the module in itself was imagined by the students demanding a grounding module that could speak to the questions of justice, freedom, belonging, and recognition. At the time, they felt that they did not really, the architecture, was not representative of their own experiences. They felt that the history of the future was predetermined and they were not part of it. And so students demanded that from the university, and I happened to teach at the time sociology undergraduate, and I was influenced a lot by bell hooks, the idea of teaching to transgress, and where bell hooks says the classroom becomes a space of liberation and transgression. And so one of the students actually called me to be part of the development of this imagination. And we started with lots of workshops, discussions with staff members, students, both undergrad and postgrad, in trying to imagine what this thing should look like and sound like. And we knew that it would be a course that goes beyond and that outlives us. So it must sustain itself through transdisciplinarity. So, and it must go beyond the content. So transdisciplinarity is at the center of the module. And number two, the module was centered around values. The values of freedom, the values of recognition, and the values of dealing with the dehumanization legacies of our higher education system, which were mainly around race, class, and gender. So we wanted to challenge those power structures that, in a way, continue even today. So those kind of students were very imaginative. And when we got together with staff members and the students to co-create the actual content of the module, we knew the principles, that it must be guided by the issues of freedom, it must be guided by the issues of justice, it must be guided by the issues of recognition, sustainability, because ultimately the future will have to be determined by all of us as sharing common humanity. And we knew that our humanity without the planet is basically, we are doomed if we're not going to think about ubuntu bethu, our own humanity, and the planet-centeredness. So this is when we then thought, okay, let's divide this thing in different categories and have different facilitators, people facilitating from different faculties, disciplines. This is the first time Mandela sees a law student sitting next to a conservation student and having a conversation about the future of the society. This is the first time that a science student is seated next to social science students, mathematics next to sociology, to say, how do I use my disciplinary knowledge as a form of building towards our responsibility towards something bigger than ourselves. So that is basically the center of the whole thing. So for example, I remember when we were thinking about the Mandela, the name, we said Mandela, the name, the person, the values, and his intellect cannot be separated from Mandela and his biographical background. So what we do there, we link Mandela, the person, and what he said, how he said it, with his clan names, Hugo. Because if you go and say you're a Mandela student, you are coming from South Africa, and you are in, let's say, Shanghai, Zheng, we believe that there has to be a sort of a distinctive knowledge about Mandela, the person, and his intellectual legacies. So that's where we ground the module, in those kind of values. If you are saying Umadibas as a rugby team, what does that mean? And you take that back to what Hugo was talking about, in terms of those clan totems that are directly linking who we are as people to the environment. Then you begin to see Ojola, not just as people, as a clan. You see them as people who are connected to a particular kind of snakes that they cannot touch. Unlike Ngoko, when we see the snake, we don't even read. Damn, I don't have time to read what it is. But there are people who can read that this is a snake, the totem. So it must not be touched. There is that kind of, so it was those kind of knowledges that we're trying to bring Africa as a site of theorizing, bring into the classroom, breaking the boundaries, because the formal education and the informal. Knowing that what Bell Hooks says about engaged pedagogy, that most of the time, what made our education system relevant, it was not because we went to good schools that can make us speak good English. It was because education was directly linked to the community in which it was taught in. For example, where I come from, where I went to school, my teachers used to say, you know, I know your mother. Your mother studied here when I was still, you know, a young teacher here. And then they were like, but why can't you look like your parents in how you think? So there's a lineage within education and schooling that is grounded in the classroom that makes education connecting directly the community to the classroom. So that was one of the kind of values to say, you are enough as a spirit, as a body, and as a thinker. Come in the classroom. Pumla then says in gender and sexuality, these dichotomies that we're trying to create and trying to crush human beings. If you are a queer person in Africa, it's so unfathomable for many of us that you'll crush another human being. Because if our philosophy is about the relational philosophy that we're talking about, that you exist because I exist, then how is it possible that we become so homophobic in this continent when we talk about the issue of sexuality, which is something that does not make sense in wanting to crush another human being? And so when Pumla talks about the shame that women bear and the resultant violence, which is attached to the histories of violence in our country, we're trying to address that as part of a value so that we see ourselves as part of a whole rather than one section. And I'll just make one example. I'm not going to talk about all these different categories that we attend to. Science for society. We ask our students, one of the homeworks is to say, go to your humanity, to your community when you come back over the vacation. Tell us what is the kind of problem that you see, that you would want to use your own science in the lab to resolve. I make this example all the time, that most of our, okay, I'm coming from the rural areas, we see the increasing number of mass production of baby diapers, okay? And what that does in clogging the rivers, and also because sometimes they're not biodegradable, you know? So the cattle in the rural areas, when I go back home, people tell me, yo, we can't even eat this cow because it's soiled with the baby diapers because of the mass production that we have gotten into. So we say to the students, then what do you do in the lab that will produce diapers that are biodegradable, disposable, but also that can easily not destroy the environment? And then we talk about constitutionalism and the Bill of Rights and the idea of respecting a person because you're a person. You know, so I can talk about all sorts of different things, but the most important thing is the transdisciplinarity that cuts across the module, the value-centeredness of the module, because we are not just teaching content, we're teaching on how to be in the world, how to think, and all of that, but also the responsibility that we all have towards something bigger than the individual. So that is what the module is about. I can talk about the other categories, about land, ethics, history of technology and consumption that is taught by Van Groenen from engineering. So I can talk about all different things, but I think these are just major principles. But I think what I'm super proud of is that it came natural to you guys. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you so much, Babalwa. It's a very fascinating module, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the whole rollout process goes. It must be challenging, but rewarding, hopefully. So I want to ask then Mikelinos, he's an honorary professor with us at Crichet, for anyone who doesn't know him, is it the area of education? So you, I think, explore pedagogies a lot, and I was very interested in the work you've done with Viv Bozilek around the more than human and thinking about, I think there was one paper when we talk about social work and having a different kind of underpinning to that. So I would be really interested to hear you speak a bit more about this idea of the more than human and how you see it related to pedagogy and different like disciplines and areas of work, and maybe if it speaks to any of the stuff we've already discussed, you make those links as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. I think I'd like to begin by kind of reiterating a basic clarification that was made by both Hugo and Andre on sustainability. Sustainability is not a neutral or technical term. It carries a lot of political and epistemological baggage, especially when framed within Western developmentalist imaginaries, and it was mentioned before, SDGs. There has been a lot of critique from that perspective, so I think we need to make that distinction that sustainability carries all this baggage that prioritizes human mastery, managerial rationality, and economic efficiency, as opposed to critical sustainability and critical sustainability literacies, as kind of described earlier, a concept which I think invites us to move beyond this narrow, technocratic, human-centered framing, and to think of sustainability as an ethical, political, and relational project. One that demands rethinking who we are sustaining, as Hugo said. Who is the we that we are sustaining, and for whom? So from a decolonial perspective, there has been a lot of work grappling with colonial ecologies, the historical entanglement between environmental degradation, racial capitalism, epistemic violence. So in this sense, I would argue that pedagogy cannot be only about teaching sustainable practices. It has to be, it has to nurture a different kind of outlook in the world, a different affective and epistemic disposition that unsettles this human exceptionalism, this human-centeredness that we are identifying, and opening us up to the more than human or the non-human. So we know from decolonial pedagogies, they already teach us that learning is not just cognitive, it is relational, it involves bodies, colonial histories, ecologies, and so on. Now, what the more than human brings, this perspective, is that it extends these ideas even further, because the more than human situates pedagogies and pedagogy within these webs of interdependence that include land, water, atmosphere, and other species. And so some of us call these pedagogies of entanglement. You know, this word was also used before by Hugo. So I would call this kind of relationality, building up this relationality as pedagogies of entanglement. That is, pedagogies that foster awareness of our mutual vulnerabilities and responsibilities within planetary systems. So examples we already have. Like in Canada, we have in North America, but also other places in South America as well, we have what some call land-based learning practices, especially indigenous pedagogies that teach from and with place rather than about a place. We have ecological storytelling or aesthetic practices that foreground multi-species agencies. What I would add to this, and I'm glad it was mentioned before about shame, I think another dimension that is often neglected is affect and emotion. So we need some more attuning to environmental affects, grief, wonder, dread, as educational resources rather than as obstacles. And we do have a lot of work coming out of different places around the world, especially in North Europe, in the Scandinavian region. There has been a lot of work about confronting those affects and emotions emerging rather than pushing them aside. They have a lot to tell us about the world and about other species. So all these practices, all these examples that I mentioned briefly, cultivate what I would argue is a form of relational ethics. We need this kind of relational ethics, moving beyond the idea of the individual autonomous learner towards a learner who lives in these entanglements, in these assemblages, to use another word. So sustainability discourse, I think, and talk in general, often neglects these affective and existential challenges of living in damaged worlds. A critical sustainability pedagogy has to work through what I call these emotions of collapse, grief, guilt, shame, denial, fatalism. And pedagogically, the task is not to suppress those emotions, but to actually transform them into relational capacities for care, for solidarity, for what some scholars call critical hope. So I would connect here to some of my earlier work on pedagogies of discomfort and pedagogies of affective repair. Discomfort was mentioned before. The idea that education should help learners stay with these troubles, stay with these difficult feelings, and translate them into ethical responsibilities rather than denying those or pushing them aside as either irrelevant or as either dangerous. So the goal, and I have to make this clear, is not some sort of sentimentality or emotional catharsis. I think that would be very naive, and that would be very colonial, if you if you get me. But the goal is to create in the classroom and beyond these spaces of affective responsibility, a willingness to inhabit this discomfort and let it reconfigure our relations with the more than human. Now, to close this first position, I would like to emphasize that the more than human opens a horizon for reimagining pedagogy as planetary relationality, an education for living differently, as Hugo and Andrea mentioned earlier, living differently within the limits of this world. And so following Hugo's presentation, I think we might also ask, how do these different perspectives, Black planetary studies, queer, indigenous, post-colonial perspectives, help us reimagine the planet not as resource or home, but as what some Black theorists would call, like Frank Moden and others, a fugitive space of relation, a site of mourning, a side of survival, a side of creative regeneration. So perhaps then this is what critical sustainability literacies within this pedagogical framework might be. They're not only about teaching facts or competencies, but actually cultivating different ways of feeling with and in the world, different forms of responsibility and imagination that make other worlds possible. Thank you.
I mean, we still have Shirley and Tumi to go back to, but I just thought from both what Babalwa and Mikelinos have said, it's quite dense and rich. And so I thought I'd just go to the rest of us in the audience, and if there's any questions or comments or things that have sparked in you that you'd like to raise at this point.
I'll go with the mic.
Okay, thank you. So anyone? We've got someone here who has a thought.
Hello, everyone. I think my question will go to the hydroponics group. I'm not sure if you guys have, if your hydroponics is already running, and if not, even if it is, I want to know what kind of plants are you guys planning to grow in your hydroponics? And the question for the reason why I'm asking this is because we're looking at the whole sustainability, and I think sustainability is also linked to indigenous crops, and there's a lot of crops that are indigenous to us in South Africa that I think you guys can suggest for your hydroponics. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if we go to the SDGs, one of the things that we want to also combat is malnutrition. And a lot of our indigenous crops, which we have been led to believe are not nice or whatever the case may be, could be things that you look at. And this not only ties to malnutrition, but also ties to education. Because I believe in your community, there are a lot of elderly people who know about these indigenous crops, and this education can be further passed down to children. Also, another suggestion that I'd like to make is, I know the focus is hydroponics and aquaponics, but also look at designing a system that does use soil in a very sustainable way. In that way, you can include even more indigenous crops that might not be able to be grown in your hydroponic system. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to tie up a lot of disciplinaries: education, sustainability, malnutrition, and yeah.
Thank you. I have a hand here, but I just wanted to say, Lebogang, are you from the Department of Botany? So there's a potential person to, like maybe there's a collab in the future between the departments. I'll hand over to you, and then I'll let you respond to that.
Is it morning? Good day, everyone. I don't have a question, but it's a comment. I'm in a state whereby my mind is all over the place as we speak, because I was taken by this presentation from you guys, and in my mind I've been trying to put it in context of the work that I'm trying to do in terms of my activism and stuff. And immediately, as a term, just a term from Prof. Kopano Ratele when he was here at the Masculinity Indaba, he said something about buildings being masculine. So I still have that thought that is lingering on my mind. Don't know how I will go around about it. But then linking the work that you do in terms of the work that I do in pedagogy. Recently, I made a presentation at the Learning and Teaching Week on humanizing learning through culturally relevant pedagogies and emancipatory pedagogy towards critical consciousness and social justice. And now seeing the work that you guys do, I'm thinking that that is pedagogy on itself when it is realized, because it takes into account the learning that a child will be having from home. Umzekelo sikhule kulinywa izitiye emakhaya for our own living. It takes into account that, yet at the same time, as a child, you are gaining a skill at a tender age that will help you in the longer life. So that speaks to independency from a child. So I just had that those thoughts, and there are more, but I'll just keep it brief.
Thank you so much. So I think, is there anyone else who has a, yes, there we go, please.
I just want to, I'm listening to everybody, and it's really exciting for me because I was there last year when you started to consider, and that activity happened that wasn't planned, and how you were coerced kind of into doing it. So it's fabulous to see that and to listen to everybody's input. A concern for me is we're focusing a lot on higher education, and we trust higher education to take us on the way forward for different ways of being. In not only you guys, I'm thinking all of us, different ways of being and becoming. So when I listen to all these spaces, I just want us for, and this may just be that I'm missing it somewhere, that whatever we are doing, we always need to remember the generations that are emerging. How are people learning? What are they being exposed to? How are we respecting the ways in which they're being exposed to being? And that sometimes it's hard to bring about change when we see people in higher education. I am a lecturer myself. I'm an educational psychologist. And one of the challenges we find often is that when we have to go backwards, when we have to reverse, it's harder to create different ways of being. So this is just for me, just a little, it was very, very interesting and exciting to hear all that's happening. Just a reminder also for us to think beyond higher education and look also at the ways in which we make contact. So I like the project you're doing, but I also think there's a big space for the transdisciplinary and spaces like learning and play can make a massive difference for a whole lot of socio-emotional development, especially in contexts like Helen Vale. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Really appreciate that input. Can I give it to Tumi? So Tumi, maybe you could speak to both some of the questions and thoughts that have arisen in relation to your project, and then also just to speak a little bit more about your thinking about pedagogy in relation to how you think about curriculum, how you think about the pedagogical experience. I mean, you've referred to our colleagues here as peers. So obviously you're thinking about that relationship between what would traditionally be called lecturer and student differently. So you could speak a bit to that, and then maybe if your peers would like to add as well, they can do so.
Thank you, Jenny. Where do I start? So, and I read a particular question, and I want to get into the other questions, but I was just so amazed by the academic rigor by Sis Babalo there, and I thought, let me also get in that arena there as well. And I want to Because the question I prepared was, how do I think about the question around sustainability? Hey, Oyama. Decolonization and Africanization. And I think for me, it comes back to my master's. And I think there was a lot of reflection points raised here, one being fees must fall. And for me, that did start to frame my thinking around Africanization, at least how it pertains to architecture. And my treatise at the time was the design of a municipal chamber in East London, an exploration of culture and identity in a social, contested landscape. Now, the backstory about that, we all know what happened that time. We as black people, we felt alienated around public spaces around South Africa. Hence, the reaction was, there's a disconnection here. We don't know these histories. And for me, I was very intrigued around that. And for me, this brought me to a particular site in East London, which was the City Hall, which was the very first site of the TRC hearings in South Africa, which was, one would argue, a very important inflection point as it for our post-apartheid. And I really started to think around exactly how can we as black people feel accommodated in our spaces. And for me, it all took a dive into post-colonial theory, post-colonial thought. You have your pillars, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. But through that, there was a particular scholar, Jonathan Noble, or Professor Jonathan Noble, who had a very interesting play on words, which was white skin, black mask. And it was very intriguing, and I actually brought out a chapter here. So in my treatise, the question of African identity in post-apartheid South Africa, white skin, black mask. So my colleagues will answer the question about sustainability. I want to just address this posed question around decolonization, Africanization. So Jonathan Noble is an active South African academic and author of the book African Identity in Post-Apartheid Public Architecture, White Skin, Black Mask, which is under review in understanding how dialogues of African identity engage in post-apartheid architecture. Although White Skin, Black Mask is an empirical study in nature, Noble positions from a theoretical ground as a point of departure for his investigation. Theoretical concerns in his book are drawn from Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, as a lens to critique built design projects in post-apartheid public landscape. From characteristics of reprobation of the constructs of colonialism through the confrontation of two subjectives, the colonizer and the colonized. The analogy of skin and mask used by Fanon deconstructs the duplicities of these social confrontations. Fanon's prose relating to skin and mask can be discussed in the same way in relation to post-apartheid space, where there is a confrontation of two subjectives. The dominant narrative of South Africa's history, which is colonialism, versus the marginalized, subjugated histories, local culture. The understanding of the relationships of mask and skin sets up the exploration of a new perspective of an architecture flavored with subjugated narratives that can renegotiate misrepresented identities in public spaces. It is necessary for the design project to engage in constituents of authentic versus unauthentic African identity in post-apartheid architecture. From Fanon's perspective of split subjectives of the colonizer and the colonized, Noble draws parallel between the duplicity of skin and mask and a judgment of post-apartheid public design. Building design in post-apartheid South Africa has adapted new attitude in its architectural representation, rooted in a more African conscious and moving away from Western ideology of design. As Noble explains it, Fanon's non-essentialist theories of race, culture, and identity provide a theoretical framework for dealing with visionary quality of a new architecture and its relation to dominant versus repressed forms of architectural expression. It can be argued that duplicity of skin and mask in what Nova describes as dominant and repressed forms of architectural expression can be compared to the confrontational subjectivities in the context of post-apartheid public space. Through the constructs of colonial rule and segregation, laws, apartheid, the dominant subject of Western thought has rejected marginalized subject of local traditions. It can be argued that these forms, dominant and subjugated, are both skin because both forms are natural to the core integral structure in the spatial and physical nature. And I think that's just the two constructs of architecture, the spatial and the physical. And where this treatise aim to explore, understand, as Homi Bhabhi, this third space, architectural hybridity, a new form of architectural expression where there is a blend of our marginalized identities in architecture and how we perceive space, and how that creates a new narrative in how we ourselves as Black people can feel accommodated in public space. So that just answers the question, and I will extend the other question to my colleagues as it pertains to sustainability. Lesego?
For me, I think I'm going to answer the mess right there. And then I think Obi will assist with their project. For us, when we did our project, I mean, understanding how these projects work entirely is that in the real world, in real practice, you guys as the professionals, I believe you are in agriculture. Oh, okay. So we might meet at a table when we get projects like this, and we might discuss some of these technicalities moving forward, right? So when we went quite deep within this aquaponics and hydroponics, first of all, it was a baseline with the project brief, right? So the soil idea, it was there, but we chose to diverge against it for the most part. But when we started looking at it into detail, we started seeing that the output for that system, really you would start seeing some leafy greens, you know, the spinach, the lettuce, you know, we'd start seeing some chives maybe as herbs, carrots, tomatoes, you know, the basics of a garden, you know, and some, you might even say that there is a loophole within that particular system. I mean, we really cannot cover all of these professions in one, I believe. But I think the bigger picture about it really is how, as soon as we start thinking about these ideologies, these innovative, sustainable techniques, you know, my take, and I remember I shared it with my colleagues when we were working on it, was that you want to create sort of like a paradigm for other townships, you know, because I believe that as soon as we start seeing these new technologies done right, especially in townships, you know, like I said in my last statement, it brings a sense of hope, you know. And one thing about these new technologies, and when we were doing research, I don't know if when you guys do research, but when we were doing research, we found out that aquaponics and hydroponics is still in the very early stages of its concept entirely, you know. And it creates a loophole for opportunity, especially for a nation like ours. I mean, South Africa is leading in a lot of aspects, but we're just pulled back by minor things, you know. So if we get some of these things right, I think it's where we start now closing in that gap, really, between being that kind of nation that is chasing, you know, following strategies, where now, if our people in the township start understanding this, it creates a question for what's going to happen in the future, you know. But thank you for the question. Obi?
To fill up on what Lesego just said, right? When it comes to hydroponics and aquaponics, it's divided into subtopics. Aquaponics is like a brief example of the whole system. Then within that, there are various aspects, such as the NFTs, wicket systems, and let's say aeroponic systems. So all of the systems, they can carry a particular type of plant, which is the leafy green, as it's also said, in bushy green. So with what type of plants you would like to plant depends on the type of system you're gonna use. So if you wanna go with, let's say example, the one I have currently now is aeroponic systems. It is quite good for cucumbers, tomatoes, strawberries, and herbs. So it all depends on what type of system you're gonna use.
Thanks so much. It sounds like maybe there is a gap for studying of indigenous plants and what works well for aquaponic and hydroponic systems. So that's very interesting. I want to then take us a little bit back to some things that Tumi was saying. You're talking about, is it white skin black moss or black skin white moss? I've black skin white moss. You Buffenon, yeah, okay. And you're talking about identity and authenticity. And I wanted to take us back to something on the chat. Rubina posted in the session with Hugo. She says, African by choice, but as a Western trained psychologist, I sometimes struggle with integrity. And she was asking for comments from Hugo. So maybe Hugo, I'll also come back to you just now. But first I want to actually go to Shirley, if that's okay, Shirley. I'm so sorry, put you on the spot. But the reason I want to go to Shirley is because I think this question of race and identity and the ways in which integrity, authenticity, and identity become these troubled sites under white supremacist colonial logics. And Shirley, and then obviously those logics, we've been talking a lot about how they tend to frame ideas around sustainability and have these very problematic outcomes. So Shirley, I was hoping you could speak a bit to that, to the questions of race in relation to sustainability especially, and then your work in the with the anti-racism lab in terms of trying to push back against those kinds of things. Do you have a microphone, by the way?
No,
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You only need it for the recording, because I speak very loud.
Yeah, so just recording vibes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all my colleagues that have gone before for also giving me ideas about what I should speak about. I want to thank Jenny for the invitation and also for putting me in the position of having to actually think about what I've been doing with my work so far in a way, which is interesting. Colleagues, that was a fabulous presentation. I learned so much from you. Thank you, really, a lot. Amazing. Okay, so I know a lot of you here don't know about my work at all, so I assume I should say a little bit about this thing that Jenny just introduced as Anti-Racism Lab. But before I do that, I want to say that you'll find some of what I say chimes in with Michaelinas's work on the affective and the epistemic orientation, which he sees as being really important. And also what he said about, I can't read my own writing, Pedagogies of Entanglement also. Because I think that is what Anti-Racism Lab's work is kind of going towards. Well, it has gone towards that quite a lot. And also my thinking about the affective and epistemic as well, in terms of how I approach the decolonial. So Anti-Racism Lab then, right. So I'm a Canada Research Chair in Anti-Racism and Decolonisation. And that work really has, I suppose, an online presence, and that's called Anti-Racism Lab. So you can go, if you put Anti-Racism Lab, University of Alberta, the work will come up. It's there. So I established Anti-Racism Lab in 2020, and you know what 2020 was, right? At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I needed an online knowledge dissemination arm of my Canada Research Chair project on anti-racism and decolonization in settler colonial states, which includes collaborations here with Andrea Kiet, Brazil with my colleague Breshna Tavares, my team, which is me, and a graduate researcher, Lina Soja in Sweden, and in Finland, Suvi Keskinen. Those were the settler colonial states. So the question of sustainability discourse and its imbrication in whiteness, for me, isn't so much about what you've been talking about here. It's much more about what Michaelinas mentioned about the affective and the epistemic orientation, which I therefore had to have because of whiteness, whiteliness's imbrication in so many parts of the work that we do, how we think, how we build the world, what we see as the curriculum, as Bubalo has just been talking about as well. So what do I think about this in terms of Anti-Racism Lab and its work, was the question. And I didn't kind of know how to talk about this, because when you're kind of in something, you can't really see what you do. It's only when you have some distance from it that you go, that's really what I did, right? So this is only going to be like a partial, probably, recognition of the work at the moment, because I've never been faced with this question before, Jenny, ever. So anyway. So I thought, let's talk about the hopes that I had for this project and what will remain when I leave, because of course I'm quite old, I have to retire, or say if I was unfortunate and something happened to me, I had an accident, I would still leave something of my thinking behind, I suppose. So what would be left in terms of what Andre calls the knowledge project when I leave? So I have a few things that I wrote down. One of them is, I hope that there would have been, to use Nelson Mandela Torres' ideas, a shifting of the geography of reason on decolonization and knowledge of the human and who constructs knowledge. I hope that that would have been something that maybe would come out of my work, my broader work, but clearly Anti-Racism Lab as well. The second thing would be about making anti-racism less of a dirty word. It's about decolonizing anti-racism and decolonization itself in terms of having to constantly think with and through that prefix DE, the D part, to always have the attitude of the D. So it's about removal from epistemic lives and cosmologies that harm us as humans or that see us as not human itself. It's about how we see ourselves and how we build whole worlds, as Sylvia Winter reminds us in all of our work, really. And the fifth thing that I think would be left behind is the need to think of anti-blackness and decolonization affectively, as Michaelinas was talking about. So what will be sustained through the Anti-Racism Lab archive of the speaker series on YouTube and on the website, because we've got YouTube and we've got the website, is an approach to anti-racism and decolonization which engages with, as you would expect, knowledge, power, and the coloniality of gender. It also engages with becoming, not just being, with becoming, and with affect. The first three, knowledge, power, and the coloniality of gender, we can easily recognize from the canonical Latin American decolonial theory. The last two, becoming and affect, are, I won't claim them as my own, but yeah, they are what I've contributed also to decolonial theory. So they're an additional take on what can stop or what can enable anti-racism and decolonization institutionally. So I see the Anti-Racism Lab archive as something that aims to destabilize whiteness if you will, as epistemology, as psyche, as politics, which is a real racial politics embedded in universities. So the archive, the Anti-Racism Lab archive, is an on-suturing project. And I'm pulling on the late Jamaican cultural theorist Stuart Hall's idea when he talks about the fact that we're suited to systems of oppression and anti-blackness. I'm also drawing on Charles Mills's, the late Jamaican black philosopher Charles Mills's ideas that we can all be co-signatories of the racial contract. So I think, just to end very briefly by saying that really it's about thinking about the human and the non-human, and this can only be enhanced in a way, as Hugo has said, as Michaelinus has said, and also as Andrea has said today already, through anti-racism and decolonisation commoning, and this needs to be a global commoning project as we read the world and make the world differently.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Hugo, would you be willing to speak to Rubina's comment briefly?
What was it?
It was basically, she said, I'm African by choice, but as a Western-trained therapist, I struggle with integrity sometimes. And she was wondering if you had any comments on that. So I don't know if you have something you want to say.
Yeah.
I suppose speaking about, I think you were speaking earlier in your discussion about deselecting yourself, but I suppose we're talking again, it's coming up again to me, what I seem to hear is, you know, you might be able to identify as African, but so much of, I suppose, the epistemic or how you're trained or the knowledge fields that you're embedded in are so very Western and embedded in a colonial logic. So I think that's kind of,
So, like an inheritance of, by virtue of the discipline and its, some of its toxicity, or any of our disciplines that have that. I mean, we've been talking about psychometric assessments with some colleagues. Maybe, Anne, you should, Lynn, sorry, you should respond to this. But many people that know that psychometrics largely are problematic. They can be useful diagnostically, but then they are also these corporate things about before you get a job, you need to be checked. It's a big money spinning syndicate. There's a bit of magic as well. That we take very seriously because it's been blessed by science and used very problematically, and its roots are, you know, measuring people's skulls and all kinds of measurements to determine intelligence and personality. But we take wholesale into practice. And how do you deal with the inheritances of knowledge, right? And it's the decisions we have to make so that we don't take the inheritance wholesale, we don't drink the Kool-Aid. We do the things that we must do, but we don't believe them, and therefore we don't take them into our classrooms and practices, or at least we question them. And I think it's responsible for everyone. So even as the question is, so you know the base that underpins your practice, or at least the disciplines of your practice, and how do you confront it without being a victim of it? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Hugo, pass to Babalwa.
Sorry, I wanted to ask the question and comment, Shelley?
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Shelley, for your presentation, and just reminding us sometimes how dangerous the work can be of trying to imagine freedoms, you know, for everyone. And I'm just thinking on the work of the anti-racism work within South Africa, you know, and how the tension of wanting to do anti-racism work with whiteness as a category that has totally pulled out of any form of imagination of common futures. How do you, maybe it's just a comment or a conversation, because I know that you're based in Canada, and whiteness that has totally privatized itself. And even if you have national conversations about black people trying to figure out how to build the country, you know. So I'm just wondering, how do we do this anti-racism work with a big collective of people who have literally checked out from the national conversation of imagining something that is anti-racist and also collective in its nature? I don't know. I'm just thinking because of the observation. And I think Christy once mentioned this as well when we were in Pretoria. Yeah.
Thanks. Shirley, if you take that, and then I know we have a question, comment somewhere on the side as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Mabalwa. I think, of course, what we witness when white people check out is like two things. The first one is the privilege of being able to do that, because black people can never check out. We can't check out of the anti-racism conversation, right? And it's not of our doing, it's their doing, I just have to say. But they have an incredible privilege globally of checking out of that, and a way of being insulated from ever having to take responsibility for what they have borne on the world, right? So I'll put that one there. I'm just thinking about this in the Jamaican context, which is the one that I know most intimately, of course, because I am a Jamaican and born and brought up there, and have more a grip of that with like Jamaican whites who have also checked out. And the way they check out is they leave the country. Literally, they leave the country. And still maintain being Jamaican, but of course, if you are a white Jamaican and you go somewhere like Canada or the United States or the UK and try and pass as a white person there, the question of, where did you come from then? And you say Jamaica, they'll always think, oh, you're black then. Because their whiteness is all over the world, aren't there? So you can't be white in the UK if you are Jamaican. So their privilege kind of fails them. But I think really, for me, I'm not going to say it's not important what white people think. That's not what I mean when I say it's more important to me what we think, the kind of world we want to build, and what we can find sustainable, what we can stomach in a way, what doesn't make us want to throw up on a daily basis, right? So it's to me about building freedom politics, as you've said, that cut across all of us in ways in which black signifies, for me, as a unifier, rather than a source of division. So I would say shift the focus from them who have checked out, you know, because they'll always be in a position of privilege. One, they're brought about by economy, of course, we know this kind of stuff, right? What can we do as black people to do work that is about uplifting the whole people? What can we do as black people to ensure that just because of how you are complected, you're not seen as different or other from the black struggle? What can we do as black people to maintain the fact that class is important? Yes, it divides us, but we should also rise above that. Oh God, this is becoming a political speech. I'm so sorry. But it's oh, Jenny. Sorry about that. But you see what I mean? It's about us. It's about us. We have to stop thinking about them. Right? We have to stop doing that. Because as Edward Glisson, you know, Martinique and Caribbean, as Edward Glisson has told us, we cannot construct our identities in opposition to the colonizer, because then we will never decolonize. We just can't do that. We have to think about what we want as humans, the kind of world we want to describe and build, and make that the most important. I know it's all a political platform, and it will fail, but we just have to keep going at it.
Thanks. I think Lynn and then Lynn and then Pumla.
There's Lynn first.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
Thanks.
I just want to go back to the question that was there and your response as well.
psychometrics is so political and it affects everybody in this room, although you may not have experienced it now just firsthand, it will meet you in your life. So I think it's really important. You said some really a beautiful thing for me is how do we identify ourselves and not do it in opposition to the other. So when I'm sitting and I'm listening, people are already countering the narrative that goes around that. But I think for us in the field of psychology, that affects everybody in the country, in all our individual fields, why has it taken us so long to even become more culturally sensitive? Which is a key word now, a buzzword with that, to work with people across. Why have we not addressed the psychometric assessment tools? Because it takes time and it's uncomfortable and it challenges the norm. So I think it is a lesson that for me just taking away about us critical sustainability literacies in relation to CIVIC University. What do we serve? Because we train the people, we do the research. Everybody here is talking about very exciting and new things. But maybe we should encourage our colleagues who aren't doing that to sit down and have those conversations so that we are able to counter being trapped in that perception of just how does it affect me. And what's her name, Jenny? Shelley. And Shelley said there, we must look at working to uplift the whole people.
Thank you, Lynn. Fortunately, I think there's another question here, but Pumla, you first.
Thank you very much. Can I do 1.5?
1.5 questions.
Something to the team, but I have a question for Shirley.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so to Lisiko, Ritumetsi, Ubakeng, and Matapelo, and to me. Right? Yes. Well, the question is more to your peers than to you, to me, if you don't mind. First of all, thank you so much. I mean, it was such such a pleasure and a joy. And I also, like Shirley, learned an enormous amount. And I think that in times often like these where we don't think about, we can feel a little bit deflated. And so I want to thank you first of all for just the absolute kind of brilliant invitation in the work, but also for the hope that I don't think you were trying to give us hope and make us feel hope. I think you were just like, let's dazzle you and show you what wonderful things you did, which you did. But I think also I know that I kind of, and I hope I'm not being an annoying old person, but if I am, I'm sorry. But also just because I think that so thank you for that. Now, the question for you is, one of the things, I can't remember which of you said it, but one of the things that you said was about how part of what you imagine with this project is it also as a form of, I think you used a much better word, but as a model that can be thought with and worked into different kinds of townships and context. You didn't say, one of you said that. Maybe it wasn't you. I'd see you frowning very disapprovingly. Okay, this is why there's four of you, so the people for whom this work can perhaps answer the question. And so I was quite curious about what you, because I mean, I'm not an architect, and so I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about what you think about that process, about that sense of, because you've developed something phenomenal, the way in which you talked about it made me think that you're not just thinking you're going to apply it Like, okay, so now we're going to go to Mdantsane and we'll apply it. And then we'll go to Soshanguve and we'll just apply it. That you're actually thinking about something much more interesting. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit more of some of that, thinking about what's exciting for you in that prospect and what, so, because I'm imagining as you did this, there were other things you're like, I think we want to do this, and then no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this. So I guess part of me is share some of your thinking around what the dream work continues to be around the project. Also again, to just kind of thank you. I wish you kind of almost making me wish I spent more time with architects, which is not really what I really want to do, but thank you so much. And then Shirley, maybe an unfair question, but I'm... Oh, no. I mean, there's many things, but I'll ask you one question. So when you're talking about... I'm very struck by the idea that Canada does not have race differentiated data in that moment. And so if you want to do anything around asking very specific questions, which are very important for obvious reasons to you, they are almost, the questions are themselves unaskable. At the same time that Canada occupies this kind of place in the global imagination as kind of progressive North America versus middle America, which is the US, which always just is America. And so I'm curious about that because I sometimes do a lot of my work in one of the other contexts of where I think about blackness is in the context of parts of Western Europe, Germany specifically. And interestingly, I was at not so long ago when I was doing some work there again, got into a bit of a weird fight, really unpredictable, predictable and avoidable, tense moment around a discussion which you can see, I think this might be a difficult question, much more than unfair question, difficult to articulate. So, okay, so the situation is someone who's Afropean, but not from, but lives in a German context, but is from a different country, and out of fairness, I won't say from where, makes this argument, so comes to a context of largely black feminist gathering from all over the world, from like West Indian, North America, the continent, Afropia, and so on, and makes these arguments, poses this challenge around the important work that black feminism needs to do in the world. But black feminism figures there exclusively as US American black feminism. And so I guess the question, so that's part of what I'm thinking with you, and I'm thinking about, okay, obviously there's things that have happened in Canada that black people have done, so they should have factored in part into the logic of why it's important to have race desegregated, and yet it's not there. And so one of the things that this person argues, so this person makes this argument, and it's interesting because there's no reference point of any black feminist work in the context in which this is given. So the question that I'm asking then is, I wonder whether, and this is perhaps the unfairness, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about the way in which we're thinking about blackness in the moment, and through no fault of their own, the ways in which certain ideas about global blackness recur in certain academies in ways that make I don't want to say local, articulation, radical blacknesses from different places, invisible, even as we're talking about global blackness studies, right? So we theoretically, part of why we talk about global blackness and black planetary is that we want to have a conversation across the planet and claim the planet. And yet, in many ways, part of what's happening is that at different points, certain aspects about black Britishness appear and then they disappear. And then we talk about British blackness or German blackness or South African blackness or Namibian blackness through a very specific, I don't know, yeah, I think you know what I mean. And so just kind of your thoughts about that, because it's difficult to articulate because you don't want to, it's not an argument against the forms of black thinking that travel more consistently. But it surely then, I don't know, there's a...
Thank you.
It's a very messy question.
Thanks, Pumla. Can I just get our last question from this side? And then I'll ask Shirley and our team here to wrap up for lunch. Just to say, we're not keeping you from lunch. Lunch is late. It's only coming at past. So we have reason to sit and talk more. Okay, so I think it's Carl with your input, and then we'll go Shirley and the team. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Dumi, your projects with your team promises so much, and which is a pretty much good thing. But I also want to ask, these projects, are they done for communities or with communities? Reason being that, the academy has placed itself as those that hold the monopoly of knowledge and the production of it too. That we definitely know what is needed in KwaZakhele, where else we don't even live there. We are not faced with the day-to-day challenges that are there. That is the first question. And now we constantly keep speaking about how indigenous knowledge systems should find its place in the academy, which for me is also quite problematic because the academy seems to be the only place where knowledge is credible. Imagine now, indigenous knowledge systems must fight for survival in a Western, Eurocentric, bourgeoisie, rational thought kind of thinking. All right? So indigenous knowledge systems cannot exist on its own. It must come to the academy and prove itself that it is credible. I do not really know much about science and architecture, but my grandfather had a mud-thatched hut where when it's hot, it becomes very cool. And when it's cold, it retains heat. And I'm even told that it can... Sorry about that. I'm even told that the mud bricks can even stop a bullet. I'm not quite sure about that. But what I've experienced is the heat regulation of it. For me, unless I do not know what science is, but that is science, that is technology to me, right? What do you think could be the problem with the academy? That no matter what we do, it's not really intentional about having indigenous knowledge systems as equal partners to the production of knowledge. The only thing it has subjected indigenous knowledge systems is by the way, we're going to have a workshop. Let's find people around Zweden to invite, right? Let's find Khoisan people around to speak about the history of South Africa, colonialism, and whatever it may be. Just personally, what do you think is the problem? What do you think is the cul-de-sac there? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carl. So I think you're raising a lot of questions that will feed into the conversation after lunch as well. So we can have deeper conversations there as well. So Shirley, and then architecture team. So yeah, Shirley.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I'll attempt to say something about Pumla's question. And for me, what's important in my own work is to talk about Black Caribbean feminism, because I think that's one kind of aspect of feminist thought that's very often marginalized. So I see that as my particular work to do in the context in which I find myself. But I wanted to say something maybe a little bit about like global blackness. So when I think about global blackness, I think about the work of Marcus Garvey and the United Negro Improvement Association. That was a vision of global blackness, which I think really, it makes total sense to me. I understand it. Because it was about people from the African continent and African descendant people globally. That included, at the time when people hadn't been giving much thought to Australia, that included indigenous people in Australia within the definition of global blackness. And there was actually a chapter of the UNIA, I think it was in Sydney, in the 1930s. That's not really spoken about very much any longer, but that is an important way of thinking about how Black liberation thought has got like a global expansiveness and inclusivity, which we don't see very often in terms of other kinds of ways of thinking blackness. And another person that I know is much loved in the African continent, or maybe parts of it, or maybe no longer, is Walter Rodney and his idea about what Caribbean blackness is constituted by. You know, because he was the person who began Black Power in the Caribbean, and for him, when we talk about Black Power in the Caribbean, we're not just talking about a very narrow idea of African descendant peoples, as you get in the United States. It was about a really broad working class struggle, which included all of the people who were caught in the plantation economy and still are, in the grip of the poverty and dispossession that also entails. So for him, it was about a coalition between people of African and Indian subcontinent descent who came to the Caribbean as indentured laborers. So that's what I mean about an expansive kind of approach to blackness. And that also links into my own particular political orientation within the UK, where I went when I was 19 years old, which was about seeing blackness, again, not just about being around sub-Saharan African descent. It was a political umbrella term that encompassed many different people under it, in terms of opposition to whiteness. I don't know if that answered your question, Pumla, because it's hard to answer. But what you are describing to me is a context of exclusions and inclusions based on some particularities that we sometimes cannot fathom because we're not from that context. And they are exclusions which actually make us suffer as Black feminists who would rather work on the politics of inclusivity and political action than these kind of finite divisions. But anyway. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Okay, so we have the last few minutes to close. Who would like to respond? Thank you.
To answer your question with regards to implementing the different systems into different communities, it depends on that specific community. So when we design for a certain site, we look at the opportunities, we look at the constraints of every site. It's very easy to uproot a container classroom and put it in a different community, but it's not so easy to uproot certain structures that are designed specifically for that site. Like, for instance, the fontaine was designed by looking at the overflow of water that was there and the different kinds of constraints being the crime within the community as well. So we can take certain aspects and elements from what we had designed and try to incorporate in a way that it caters for the different community and the different school or whichever space that we're putting it in. And then we'd have to look at the opportunities that are in that specific community. Maybe it's rich in soil, maybe it's rich in maybe rain or whatever the case might be. So those are the different ways that we can actually incorporate these different structures into different communities.
And really, for me, the bigger picture about it, it's understanding the simple maths about it. I mean, I don't know if everyone heard, but the township economy right now is at 900 billion, you know. So understanding that and bringing some of these, I think my lecturer said, reimagining sustainable futures, you know. It gives everyone an opportunity to equally tap into that 900 billion, so to speak. So I think what she said is more or less right, that obviously not every site is going to get a fair opportunity to this particular system. But again, it gives us room again to start thinking of more possibilities, you know. The biggest reflection for me, especially in this setting, it has to be how really the G20 summit is going so far, right? I had an opportunity to get exposed at the Sandton Convention Center a few years back. And the biggest thing I remember which was discussed was how really South Africa, we can get a step forward, you know, from being a third world country to being some of the leading through these simple strategies we can put in, you know. I mean, minerals, agriculture, we are behind, but at the same time, we are the forefront for supply, you know. So for me, I think, I don't want to call myself a capitalist, but I think the numbers can get us ahead if we start somewhere. You know, if these engagements go a bit deeper, I think we can find ourselves reimagining townships bigger and better. You know, and then yeah, we'll see where that gets us. Yeah.
I feel like you opened up a whole range of other questions around your statement.
I just want to just quickly answer Carl's first question. It's a very relevant, great question, and I've seen it a lot. Where, come the beginning of the year, okay, we have to do a community project, and it's like that. So it's not really something that is from the heart. And with this one, it has a different temperature to it because it really did start at the end of last year from this workshop last year from Professor Viona Goliath. And this is really something that's been driven by the church right next to the school. And the temperature of this is quite different because there's actually an active committee with learners, teachers, community members, where we meet up every single month, and we have a wide range of activities, even so much so that we actually take the time to visit other successful schools, one being at Charles Tuna, which actually has a indigenous knowledge garden itself with very great projects. So I mean, and all of that engagement is then brought to the table with the class as a framework to follow. So from that sense, this has been really organic and from the heart, and doesn't stop here. We are still going forward. It's going to be something that's going to be a strategic project with the broader hope vision, #Oyama. And so that's where it is. So I think where I can draw out a critique on the work is that there needs to be a place where we engage with the school and they can start to make decisions on the final architecture, where it could be a blend of different design, a design that actually can work towards something that actually makes this very unique and authentic for Hope School. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think then thank you so much to everyone who contributed to this particular session. We will convene after lunch at 2:15 for the session on IKS and sustainable food systems. Just a note: if you don't have a sticker and you haven't signed the register, please do that before lunch, because your tag is your food voucher. And anything else, Sine? Fine. Sine in the lovely Mandela jacket that Shirley is jealous of. She likes the jacket. She wants one. She can help you with getting a tag and signing the register. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you after lunch.